Hello and welcome to another episode of TWiML Talk, the podcast where I interview interesting people doing interesting things in machine learning and artificial intelligence. I'm your host, Sam Charrington. In this episode of our AI in Sports series, I'm joined by Noah Gift, founder and consulting CTO at Pragmatic Labs and professor at UC Davis. Noah previously worked for a startup called Score Sports, which used machine learning to uncover athlete influence on social media and internet platforms. Noah and I look into some of his findings in that role, including how to predict the impact of athletes' social media engagement. We also discuss some of his more recent work using social media to predict which players hold the most on-court value, and how this work could lead to more complete approaches to player evaluation. Finally, we spend some time discussing some areas that Noah sees as ripe for new research and experimentation across sports. And we take a look at his upcoming book, Pragmatic AI, An Introduction to Cloud-Based Machine Learning. For those interested in pre-ordering the book, be sure to check out the link in the show notes for a nice discount code. And now, on to the show. All right, everyone, I am on the line with Noah Gift. Noah is a consulting CTO and professor at UC Davis and was recently CTO of a sports company, Score Sports. Noah, welcome to This Week in Machine Learning and AI.
Hi, glad to be here.
It's great to have you on the show. It is our tradition here to have our guests introduce themselves to the audience. And why don't you do that and tell us a little bit about how you got involved in AI and machine learning?
Yeah, so I have, I think, a pretty unusual background in that for a period of my life, when I was about 10 years old, I worked in television and film. I grew up in Los Angeles, so I had this other career as a teenager, and it culminated in working as a editor for ABC Network News on national news. I remember distinctly cutting a story about O.J. Simpson and passing that live on the air.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I had this whole
Can we just push pause on that? Yeah. Like, how did that happen? Is that like, did you start as like the typical child star thing and find your way into the quote unquote back office or editing or something like that? Or was it a totally different path from what we might imagine?
Well, it was totally different in that my dad had a television production company. So I guess it's a little bit like how there's kids now that are writing iPhone apps at 10 because their dad was a programmer. Well, my dad worked in television and he had a company, and I was working with him, I guess as an apprentice, television, camera, microphones, editing, just knew all the stuff. And then it culminated in, I eventually got it. It's a lot like a programmer. You get a job as an editor. At the time, is you had to know the equipment. You go into a lot like a programming test. You go to, let's say, ABC, and you say, "Hey, I'm an editor," and they say, "Okay, well, let's see if you can edit." And they give you a test, and if you pass it, then they hire you. And so I passed it, and I worked for the news for a while. And this is 1992, I think, 1992, 93.
Okay.
And at the time, I was getting paid like $500 a day. So for a teenager, that was very nice. I was very happy with that salary. And then I was actually given the opportunity to do that as a full-time job, but even though my dad was actually encouraging me to never go to college, I rebelled and decided to go a different path. And I think part of it was that I've always been really interested in sports, and I was competitive at basketball, football, track, and in college did decathlon. And basically, there's a period in my life where I wanted to be a professional athlete. I didn't care what sport. It was track, basketball, even at one point, ultimate frisbee. I remember there was in my mid 20s. There's a guy that was trying to get me onto his pro ultimate frisbee, or semi-pro, I guess, ultimate frisbee team. But that's probably why I eventually ended up getting a bachelor's degree from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, was in nutritional science. That was my passion. And then there was a period after I graduated from Cal Poly that I was training to play professional basketball, and I was training with some people that played on teams in Europe, and I had some tryouts scheduled, and then at the same time my backup plan was to get a job somewhere, and I happened to get a job offer at Caltech, And so it was a very difficult decision for me to go, oh, wow, this is Caltech, or try to play professional basketball and make, 20 grand a year.
Yeah.
And I decided to work at Caltech. I still in a way have some regrets about that, but I got a job at Caltech, and I really, from there, it changed a lot of the way I think. And that's really what got me interested in AI, was some of the people I met. Really changed my life. I learned about Python there. Back in 2000, nobody used Python, but it was just something that all my friends did. So I figured I had to do it. And then I met a lot of really famous AI people, just accidentally. It's like I was like Forrest Gump. I mean, the Fei, who is in charge of AI at Google, I remember having dinner with her, just randomly meeting her. Christoph Koch at the CNS lab, who is in charge of Paul Allen's Institute, just some guy that I knew. One of my really good friends and mentors was this guy named Dr. Bogan, who did the first hemispherectomy. I remember going to his house all the time.
Hemispherectomy?
Hemispherectomy, removing half of the brain. It was a procedure that was done to, they didn't do it that often, but it was done for epileptic patients that had, basically debilitating seizures.
Okay.
And he was working under Christoph Koch, and he became a mentor to me. And I distinctly remember having many conversations at dinner about neural networks and how they're used to figure out who would be a fighter pilot, and so all these ideas about AI and neural networks were percolating. At the time, I was an okay, I would say amateurish, sysadmin type programmer. But so in a way, it's funny. I was much more interested in AI back then in my early 20s, and in fact, before I was even interested in programming. And I remember talking to a professor at Caltech, and he'll probably not admit to this, but I remember asking him, like, hey, I'm so excited about AI. And he said, oh, you shouldn't even think about that. It's a dead field. It's AI winter, just you're wasting your time. And I just remember thinking, I think I'll be interested in it anyway. And I actually set this goal for myself that, and I think I've achieved it, which is that by the time I'm 40, I wanted to be doing something serious in AI, and I wanted to be fluent in several programming languages, and that's pretty much happened. And
nice.
I think, it was part of it was just the people I met, and also I guess I've always been motivated by people that tell me, maybe it's the sports part of me, but people have told me, oh, you can't do that, and it's like, oh, okay, well, that's exactly what I'm going to do then.
Very nice. Very nice. And so you, Caltech led to a bunch of other places, and most recently, before you went off on your own to do consulting, you were at a startup called Score Sports. Is that right?
Yeah. So Score Sports was interesting to me, again, because of the athletic component to it. I had before that worked in film and had a whole other history of, Weta Digital, Avatar, and Disney Feature Animation, and Sony ImageWorks, really cool film companies, and where I did a lot of Python programming. But then, I spent a long time in startups and doing that in San Francisco. But then there was a part of me that was a little not perfectly fitting in, I guess, with the culture of San Francisco, and that again, I've always been really athletic and into sports, and there's almost like an anti-healthy, I think it's changed now, but there's almost like this, like, oh, you exercise, oh, that's weird, at least I felt that way at startups. Maybe I had a complex, I don't know, but I really liked that this was a sports company and people worked out together, and they actually did mixed martial arts at lunch, and so it was really interesting to me. I was like, oh, okay, this is a really cool culture. And I started there. We really didn't have a product, and we struggled a little bit initially to build something. In the first 3 months I was there, though, we were able to build a lightweight fantasy app that had a lot of traction. We were like, okay, this is maybe we're onto something here. And we were very fortunate, though, because we had some secret weapons, I guess. And one of our secret weapons was Brett Favre. He was on the board of the company, and he was. We knew that if we built something that was marginally useful, that having him a part of it would really take off. And so the idea for the company was that we were going to be a sports specific social network. And I guess in a way, thinking about Facebook, and it's funny now, there's a lot of controversy around Facebook because of trolls and echo chambers and everything. Yeah, fake news. And at the time, though, I think really the premise was a good premise, which is there are people that just really don't want to be on Facebook. They just want to talk about sports.
Right.
And that was the idea, was that they don't want to read fake news. They don't want to talk about politics or religion. They just want to talk about sports. And so that's what we started to build. And it took us about a year. And we built a social network. And I remember we had almost no traffic. And one of the first things we did, though, was we were pretty smart in that we used Brett Favre to create a prediction around the NFL draft in 2014. And this is when Johnny Manziel was a big deal. He was in the NFL draft, and he talked about it and posted it on Score, and then linked to it from Facebook and Twitter. And it just, it was like one of the biggest traffic days of all time, almost. It was. I think we got something like 5 million page views in an hour, like just incredible. Wow. Yeah, just incredible traffic. And then some of the comments were, I'm crying. I'm so happy that Brett Favre's talking to me and liking my posts. And we're like, okay, we're onto something here. And so as we knew that there were, and this is where some of the ML and AI stuff comes in, is that originally the thought process too was to provide tools for athletes to better engage with their fans, make revenue. We felt like they were getting ripped off by Facebook, in that if you look at the organic reach of some of these athletes, they're going down to 1% to 3%. And so the idea was that we wanted to give intelligent tools to athletes, create a specific channel, and then we knew that based on some of the historical data that some celebrities were, like Brett Favre, created a lot of traffic. So the thought process was, instead of what typical startups do by buying a lot of Facebook ads, we were going to create organic growth by partnering with athletes, but first finding the athletes that were influential, partnering with them, and then because we were helping them, it was a synergistic relationship, and that not only would we get growth from the platform, but when you pay somebody, oftentimes they're very friendly with you. And so they're open to other opportunities. And so that led to 2 business units in the company that I helped develop along with some other people, which were influencer marketing, part of the company, which ultimately grew to millions of dollars of revenue, and culminated. Probably the biggest deal we had was with Machine Zone and Conor McGregor. And then we also had a merchandising part of our company. So we pay athletes, we find the best athletes. They create growth on our platform because we have this great relationship with the athletes. They're then open to do more deals, which are other influencer marketing deals and also merchandising. But the beginning stage there was that as we learned from the data that was coming in from the page views and where it came from, we did realize that there was something there that we could use machine learning on to enhance. And really the core of it was that we were able to look at signals on Facebook, look at signals on Twitter, and look at signals in other sources, including Wikipedia, and create an algorithm that told us who were the most influential athletes. And there were some stars that we discovered, and one of them was Conor McGregor. And Conor McGregor, I think, is a very interesting one in that I did this talk at Strata just a week ago, but when we partnered with him in 2014, I think his average likes per a post were something like 50, which I think I've gotten posts that are, 50 likes on them. I mean, maybe not all of them, but, and then if you look at now, it's something like, I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000. And so I think had 7,000 times engagement growth in the last 4 years. And that was one of the things that we noticed in terms of in signals was that the follower counts are really, and I probably people know this by now, but follower counts are really meaningless because of the bots and people buying things. Really, the thing to look at is what is in relative terms, what's the engagement? If the median level engagement is very high in relative percentage to your followers, then that means you're a star and you're going to be eventually growing, like Conor McGregor, for example. So those are the kind of signals we look for. And then as we got more athletes that we partner with, we would get more historical data and the algorithm would get better. And in a nutshell, it did lead to us getting, for a period of time, a sustained, tens of millions of monthly active users on our platform. And then ultimately culminated in a partnership with one of the largest soccer clubs in the world, which is Bayern Munich. But like I think 90-something% of startups, we ultimately failed. But there was definitely a good run there.
Can you talk a little bit about how you used machine learning in that example? I think the way you set up the problem, it sounds like simple math, right? Divide aggregate number of likes by number of followers or something along those lines. But it sounds like you were doing something else involving collecting historical data and training a model. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there was definitely a this is one of the things I think is interesting about machine learning and in reading books or teaching in teaching my class at Davis, when I'm talking to this about this, is that it's easy to get a book that you read about some algorithm or scikit-learn or Kaggle. It's like, oh, look, I have this supervised learning data set. But in the real world, you don't even know what it is you're solving. And that's, in a way, kind of the fun thing is like, what problem are we even trying to solve? And it's, we want to predict page views. That's what we ultimately came up with is, so the more page views we get, the more users come on our platform, and then they go through our conversion funnel, and we get a low acquisition rate for users, like a much lower. So okay. First thing was to look at, what are the features, right? Like what are the signals that are telling us, how to predict page views. And so that actually was a very complex problem in a way for a few different reasons. One is that, in general, again, if it's not a Kaggle data set where you're like, oh, look, all my features are here, like in this case, you just don't know.
And labels.
Yeah, and labels, and like, let me just search through here and figure out what's happening. So even in the case of, let's say, Twitter or Facebook, we had to carve through and look at, what was interesting and what wasn't interesting, and one of the ones that really ultimately turned out to be very predictive was the median level of engagement, per athlete. And I guess that would be for anybody on Twitter, but like the median level of likes, the median level of retweets. And the reason why median is so important is that if you look at just, you just took necessarily all of them, you get these outliers and it just blows up the data set, because there are sometimes somebody gets lucky and they get like a giant retweet, and it's like, that just is not indicative of really their normal performance.
Right.
So that's one part of it. And then also trying to strengthen the signal by finding other sources. Like, for example, I eventually stumbled upon Wikipedia and realized that, wow, this is in general, I would say I'm amazed that more people don't use Wikipedia as a data source. It's just amazing, but definitely correlates very strongly with Twitter and Facebook. And so if you look at Wikipedia page views and you look at Twitter engagement, Facebook engagement, they're very correlated. So
meaning if you're looking at influencers on Twitter and Facebook that also have Wikipedia pages about them, you can correlate them? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And so those are all plugged into the model. And the other part that's, again, one of these cold start type or real world, I wouldn't say it's cold. I guess, it's a combination of cold start and real world problems is that it is non-trivial to get, let's say 1,000 social media handles, right? I mean, you have athletes, for example, that have the same name. So Anthony Davis is one of the stars in the NBA right now for the Pelicans. And there was at one period of time an Anthony Davis in the NFL. And so it's even an intern would get tripped up by that. And so that was a very, very significant problem in that, you're just going to get garbage results if you don't have really high quality control around the inputs that are going into your collection. So that one of the ways that we solved that was ultimately we landed upon Mechanical Turk. And so what we did was we created these Mechanical Turk jobs that would ask, let's say, 9 people who they thought the social media handles were: Twitter handle, Facebook handle, Wikipedia handle. And let's say if 7 of the 9 agreed, I think that's what we figured out was like a number for the quorum. And then we would select that handle and feed that into our job collection system, which would then go out and collect the raw data. And then even that part of the problem is another significant problem, is that Twitter APIs will blow up on you. You get rate throttling. Facebook APIs will blow up on you. You get bad data. So again, the real world part of it is it ultimately it took maybe like a year to really get something where the jobs framework, the collection system, we're able to accurately get the handles and regularly run our collection algorithms, and then all of that was again about a year. And so the whole 80-20 thing of cleaning the data and collecting it takes for me is absolutely the truth in the real world. I'd say even longer. And then the model, training the model is almost nothing.
Wow. And so the model output was a predictor of the number of page views specifically, or
correct.
Some
That's
intermediate.
Yeah, page view. So basically we could at that point feed in all those signals and figure out very accurately. I forget off the top of my head what the root mean squared error was, but we had a pretty low root mean squared error, and you basically knew exactly if you partnered with this person, they'd give you, let's say, 1,000 page views per post.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah, and then what's great about that is that I don't know if it's changed. I've been out of the VC game for a little bit, but if you look at cost per user, we're getting users at like 80 cents a user.
Okay, so you could back that into a cost per acquisition, cost per user, and then use that as part of your fundraising and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. I mean, if you say a user's worth $40 to $80 or whatever, it's like, hey, we can acquire them for $1, and then every dollar you put in it's a 40 time to 80 time return, depending on how you value users.
Mm. And so you went on from working on this kind of growth hacking type of application of machine learning and AI to developing some, or at least starting to think through ways that you could more apply machine learning and AI kind of more to the core of the company's products. Is that right?
Yeah. So then once we realized that we really were onto something, then we started to turn it into something we called Athlete Intelligent Dashboard. And we were in the process of, and we had some preliminary like kind of beta tools that were dashboards that an athlete or a team could look at, and they would show them. They would be able to see similar information to the information that we used for growth hacking. So they could see, in relative terms, how does their team, or how does their athlete or their whole roster of athletes, how do they compare in social media? Like, what do they rank? How many page views would they give in a campaign? Who are their fans? What are some demographic information? And then as we started to sell things, we were also linking in sales data. So how many items could this athlete or team sell, and if there was a product that they were endorsing.
Okay. And then when we spoke prior to starting the show, you mentioned, at least I took the note as doing some work to predict the best players based on their fans' social media engagement. Were you speaking of best in terms of best performing from a kind of marketing influencer perspective, or was there a crossover to actual player on the field performance based on their fan engagement? Yeah.
So after the startup, unfortunately, ran out of cash and some business deals didn't work out, and I left. And ultimately they don't exist anymore. I still was thinking about the problem because it was a really interesting problem. And over the last year, as I've decided to write a book on this, and not exactly 100% the subject, but I was digging into it more and more. And one of the areas that I was interested in is that social media was able to predict, basically how many page views somebody could give to a platform and how many products. But I was curious whether it could also predict how good a player was, and in fact even predict winning how many wins a player could bring to the team. And so I've spent, I would say, several months on this year, and the preliminary information I have is very promising, and that some of the conclusions so far are that it does appear that in the NBA that owners will pay versus points. And so anybody that's a basketball statistics person knows that points are not. I mean, they're a reasonable predictor of winning and playoff performance and things like that. But there's a lot more to it. And so players will be paid in general by the owners. Something like about $1 million a point. So if you 10 points a game, you make 10 million. But
okay.
But if you really dig into it, one of the best measures of how productive a player is wins over, essentially the wins over replacement, or I think it's wins RPM. So how many wins are attributable specifically to you? And off the top of my head, I think LeBron James, for example, is a perfect, like an outlier in that I think it's something like 23 or 25 games. Just, there's 70 something games in the NBA, and just LeBron James himself to the Cleveland Cavaliers is like 23 games. So I mean, he basically puts them in the playoffs, just him, and what I was digging into was, well, do fans engage more highly with players who have high points, or players who have better, let's say overall performance, like wins RPM? And it does appear that that fans, and I don't have enough data to collect this, and maybe if somebody wants to hire me to do a year project on it, I would dig into it more. But it does appear that fans are actually really good judges in terms of they like to engage with the best players, and if you look at, they're engaging lesser with the high point. I mean, they're obviously engaging them, but if you plot wins over replacement versus points, you can see the fans more are more engaged with the true players who are contributing to their overall team's performance. So I guess the takeaways there, again, this is still pretty preliminary, and it's possible I'm making some inaccurate conclusions, but the takeaways are that you could start to feed this into betting algorithms, for example, or fantasy, your own fantasy team, and I think it's pretty fascinating, again, that if you just look at Wikipedia, it's got this free data set for you, and it's got this incredible power to show you that that even with the page views, like if you look at page views, that it appears that the best players in terms of the true metrics, like wins RPM, they get higher page views than if you look at points.
And is this something that you think might be, granted you're early in the research here, but is this something that you think might be usable as a leading indicator, meaning helping teams find the next LeBron James or someone who's undervalued relative to what they're being paid now, and help them kind of, take advantage of that kind of information in draft type of situations or scouting types of situations? Or is it more, what's happening on, Wikipedia, social media is an indication of what's happening now, and not necessarily, having predictive value?
No, I think it could be a leading indicator, and let's take Conor McGregor, for example. So I will readily admit I've been I would say a somewhat new fan to MMA and UFC, and part of it was working at that company. But I remember when Conor McGregor came out, I thought, this guy is a showboat. He's going to get destroyed eventually. But the fans, if you look at the engagement, they must have known something, because the engagement level was just incredible in relative terms. And so I do think there's something there where, the collective wisdom of fans who really know this local athlete it says something like they know something that other people don't know. And so in a way, I think it's a signal that absolutely you could use. And again, this would be a really fascinating project. It's to look at, let's say, NFL drafts and look at the local engagement for, let's say, players. And if you, instead of looking at these BS stats like, the 40-yard dash and all these things that they've shown that have very little correlation to success in the NFL, I'd be interested if you plotted that against their social media engagement, if you would then show if that's predictive of their future success in the NFL. Again, just a theory, but I have suspicions that there's something there.
Are there players that have kind of an outsized social media impact that doesn't correlate to wins or performance? So like the exact opposite of, what we're speculating about now. A player that, has, super high social media engagement and potentially as a result of that brings super, high value to a team from a kind of marketing and audience engagement perspective, but isn't necessarily a winning or high scoring player. Does that kind of scenario ring any bells?
Yeah. I mean, I could see how you could maybe do some clustering, and you could maybe even classification. Like you could say there's, let's just off the top of my head, just kind of brainstorming here, but like you have Tim Tebow cluster, like where like super engaged fans, but turns out not that good. And then you have and then you have another cluster, which is that super engaged fans, and it turns out that they're actually above average, like significantly above average. So right. Yeah, I think there is probably some.
There's a BCG matrix here that's like your popular winners, your popular losers, your unpopular losers that you need to get rid of, and then your winners that are unpopular that maybe are your, I don't know what the cute names you would assign to these quadrants are, but maybe those are your hidden gems or undervalued folks or something like that you need to figure out how to engage with fans or something.
Yeah. I there's definitely something there, and it's surprising that I have not heard more about it.
Yeah, I have said on the podcast before that I'm not the biggest sports fan at all. Our producer is a huge sports fan, and so we have some interesting plans to do some conversations around how machine learning and AI apply to sports. But I will say that my appreciation for sports, multiplied by, who knows how many orders of magnitudes after reading Moneyball. I thought that the treatment of Billy Beane and the A's and kind of understanding how he used this insight about a particular metric was being undervalued by the marketplace and really changed the way folks staffed baseball teams. That was amazing. That was fantastic.
Well, I'm not 100% sure how much I could talk about this, but I'll say it in rough terms that there was a company that I knew of from when I used to play pickup basketball at Caltech with the founder, and he was working with some teams in the NBA and also with NFL, and they were looking at motion tracking data, and actually they had algorithms that gave teams insights like the center in the fourth quarter is going to just be horrible, so go at him, or this player has a horrible left hand, and so basically make them go left, and I won't say which teams, or I don't know if I'm supposed to say it or not, so I'll just leave it. But there definitely are this is happening in sports, and there are people that are using machine learning, especially on like things like motion tracking data, and they do have some secret information that I'm sure is playing a role in the amount of wins they have. And so, I think you can make an argument for teams, let's say the NBA, because I have a little bit of inside information that maybe some of the teams that even we can think of off the top of our head that have a lot of wins may have some secrets that they have algorithms that let them have insights that other teams don't have, and so there's a little bit of a race, I guess. I don't have all the info, but I know a little bit.
Yeah, you've got to imagine that the popularization of Moneyball, if it wasn't already kind of an open secret that data can make a difference in sports, that kind of blew the top off. And now that machine learning has become so much more accessible, you've got to imagine that any owner or general manager kind of worth their salt is at least experimenting with how to apply this both on the field, on the court, as well as in terms of the business, ticket sales and advertising and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, and so that actually does lead to other area that I was doing a little bit of research on. That again, I would love to do more research on is how is the valuation of a team set. And what's interesting is in the NBA, for example, the two most valued teams are the Los Angeles Lakers and the New York Knicks. Each are worth several $billion. And if you look at their records, I think the Lakers are a little better this year, but if you look at their records the last few years, they're very bad. Very bad. Right. And what's interesting is that attendance really doesn't seem to be affected by this evaluate. And then if you dig into it, it's, what are the things that predict the most valuation of a team? And it's actually pretty boring so far as things like, what's the median home price and what's the population density?
Yeah, my immediate thought was market size when you mentioned those two teams.
Yeah. So if you live in a major metropolitan area with high real estate values, you're going to have a highly valued team. And so in a way, maybe, and I don't know how long, I know the Clippers, for example, I forget how long Donald Sterling owned them, but they for so long were just a horrible team. I mean, just one of the worst teams in the NBA. But I guess if you're just strictly talking about an investment, yet maybe it doesn't even pay in terms of valuation to do anything. Because if you're in Los Angeles, New York, San Francisco, and you're just there, you will just make money and people will show up.
Yeah, but losing sucks. So you want to try to apply some of this stuff to try to figure out how to win. If you're going to have to show up every day, you might as well try to win at least.
Yeah. Well, I do wonder though, if there's some teams that are like that, where it's an investment or a vanity thing. And like the Clippers come to mind. If you've been an NBA fan, there was a period for 10 or 20 years, I think, where they're in Los Angeles and you're like, how can you be this bad? It's like you're trying to be this bad. But I guess if you look at the Clippers when they were sold, there was a pretty substantial profit. And so, yeah, that's kind of another. It's
kind of like the sports equivalent of like a self-storage facility. It's like this is, or a parking lot. It's like, this is a real estate play. It has nothing to do with actually providing the service.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that the more interesting part of the story may be that if you look at and I have some in the talk I did, I showed some 3D graphs about this, but if you look at some of the cheaper teams I don't know, Dallas or Houston, and you can look at those and go, if you were rich enough to buy a team, that's maybe where you'd want to buy a team is somewhere where they have lots of wins, but they're very, very low valued. Versus if you cared about performance. Mm-hmm. But if you just wanted to make a real estate play, then try to buy low in Los Angeles or New York.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked about a bunch of ideas along these lines, but I'm curious if you've got others in mind. If you're a data scientist, practicing hobbyist, whatever, and you're also interested in sports, what are some areas that you think are ripe for, experimentation and research? Where do you think folks could go in and have some fun and maybe, make an interesting difference?
Yeah, so I do have some off the top of my head. In the last 5 years in particular, I've really gotten into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and it got me really interested more in the UFC, because Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a pretty big component of it. And one of the things that does seem like it's massively ripe for hobbyist data scientists, is the machine learning around things like submissions, for example. So, what's really interesting is that if you just look and you plot the submissions for the last 20 years. I think I have a project where I did this. Like a rear naked choke is the number one. Then I don't know, that's like arm bar and a triangle, a leg triangle are coming next. But what's really, I think, could be very interesting is the chain effect of is a rear naked choke the best high percentage submission because you started with that, or did you start with a bunch of other submissions? And so I think there could be a lot of interesting things that could happen in terms of what are the chain of submissions that someone would try, and are there sequences like almost like a Pac-Man game? I don't know if you remember the 80s. There was maybe I'm too old, but for people to remember this, but I remember when I was a little kid and I used to play Pac-Man. I bought this book that was like how to cheat at Pac-Man, and there was literally a screen that you went through, and then you could beat every screen for a while.
Right.
And I could see how in the same thing with jiu-jitsu, how maybe there's some moves that work in certain situations, and so it seems like there's
like was it the Konami code, like up, down, down, right, left?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I would be very curious if that's one area. Another one too would just be some of the really interesting statistics that have been generated in other sports like baseball and NBA because they're so popular. Those things haven't really been applied to the UFC or Bellator or these mixed martial arts forums. And so, even from a financial perspective, I could imagine there could be a lot of money made by somebody going in and really figuring out, who is the best player or who are the best fighters in the UFC and who are, what are the best techniques. And I think that in particular is a very interesting one. I also think in terms of other sports like track and field, I think are also there's some things that if I was independently wealthy, I would pursue. Like one of them is like, what is the optimal amount of training and what's the best periodization schedule for, let's say, track athletes, like a 400 meter runner, a 200 meter runner. And I think there's a lot of ground that can be covered in, I guess the way I would classify it is like a ways for fitness where you have something that's constantly telling you the right thing to do. And the thing that's interesting about the human body is that it's not a linear relationship. Like, oh, I just exercise more and then I get better. There's these really complex things that are happening, and that's why periodization is so effective. Is you do, let's say, a strength cycle in track, for example, and then you go on an endurance cycle, and so I think that's a period. That's an area where machine learning, artificial intelligence can play a really significant role. And it hasn't, to my knowledge, there hasn't been a lot of traction there.
Interesting. I did an interview with Ilka Korhonen, who is a technology VP at Firstbeat, which is the company who they have their models embedded into a lot of the fitness watches for doing analytics on the heartbeat and the heartbeat rate, but the heartbeat interval. I forget the name of the specific acronym. But they do, in addition to their business where they sell these, models and IP to the watchmakers, they also have this pro athlete training or insight or whatever business where they will apply that data to I think their stuff is what allows a lot of the watchmakers to now produce VO2 max and some of these other metrics off of the heart rate data from the watches. And the VO2 max, I think, has something to do with training and rest intervals and stuff like that. So if anyone wants to take on that challenge, check out TWiML Talk number 106. Any other ideas?
I think the other one that's, I guess, somewhat related is just in terms of nutrition as well. So my background, my undergraduate degree is nutritional science, and I still haven't let go of a lot of the ideas that I learned. And I think another one again is that I have not seen this yet is machine learning around nutrition. And the closest I've seen is there's some longitudinal studies that came out the last several years about, I think there's a nurse study that was 20 or 30 year period where they showed the predictive power of a food in terms of how much weight you would have. So if you eat more yogurts, you over a 5-year period, the more servings of yogurt you eat, the lower your body weight. The more servings of nuts you eat, the lower your body weight. The more servings of Coke, chips, the higher your body weight. And so I could see again from just athletes and just regular people that you could basically have something that's constantly, again, very non-intuitive, and I think this is where AI comes in. You could basically constantly be telling someone you could actually have forecasts, like you could forecast based on what somebody's eating, what they're going to weigh, right? And so you're not counting calories, you're literally just telling someone constantly, like, yeah, here's your forecast for a year from now based on what I've seen you doing. So if you want the forecast to go down, you need to be there. Here's 4 choices.
Interesting. That makes me think of, it'd be cool to have an app that like you just, and I've seen when we were at the peak of the quantified self thing, I've seen versions of this, but I don't think they have the AI stuff on the back end and access to all the sensor data. But an app where you just rate kind of how you feel on, a handful of dimensions, like physically, mentally, whatever, happiness. And then it looks at your historical rating patterns, your sleep patterns from your watch or other, sensors, pillow sensors that they're selling now, all that kind of stuff, your diet that you put into your tracking app, and just tells you, what, this spaghetti is going to taste really good, but you're going to be crabby as hell tomorrow or whatever. And just make some simple predictions based on that. Or, it's 11:30. You want to stay up another half an hour to work on this project or finish this movie or something like that, but you're going to feel like crap tomorrow.
Yeah, I do think that is the future of AI, and those are the kind of things that I personally am interested in for this next decade of my life is that AI assistant where there are things that are not easily thought about. The brain is just not good at. Mm-hmm. And I think things like health, nutrition, sleep, driving, there's all these things where algorithms can do it better. Mm-hmm. So I do think that's going to actually be a significant impact on humanity in a positive way.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Before I let you go, if I may, you are in the final stages of getting a book out the door. Is that right?
Yeah. So I spent about the last year working on a book called Pragmatic AI. And the premise of the book is that there's a lot of AI, like many of the conversations we had here, that is very straightforward and practical, and that it should just be done, versus AI is not just self-driving cars that are fully autonomous. And in addition, that the cloud plays a big role in getting things into production.
When are you expecting that to hit the shelves?
I think it's June. So I'm in technical review this week. So then it goes into production. So yeah, I think June, I believe, is when it gets on the shelves.
And is it a hands-on practical coding kind of book, or, this is the opportunity, landscape, higher level kind of book?
No, it's super hands-on. So there's examples of doing, for example, the social media stuff we talked about. There's a whole exploration with code on that. There's how to analyze a GitHub project and figure out, what's wrong with your team. And then there's solutions for AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, TPUs. So yeah, very, very hands-on with code examples, mostly in Python. There's a little bit of R and a lot of Jupyter notebooks.
Okay. Oh, very cool. Well, I will keep an eye out for that. But I appreciate you taking the time to jump on the call and to chat with you. I enjoyed learning about what you're up to.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to listening to more of your shows.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Noah.
Okay, talk to you later.
All right, everyone, that's our show for today. For more information on Noah or any of the topics covered in this episode, head on over to twimlai.com/talk/158. To follow along with our AI in Sports series, visit twimlai.com/AI in Sports. If you're a fan of the podcast, you know we'd like to encourage you to head on over to iTunes or wherever you grab your podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating and review. They are super helpful as we push to grow this show and the community. As always, thanks so much for listening, and catch you next time.